I feel like the
Yeah,
arch nemesis, like that's one of the ways that they really screwed up the thing. Like the patterns, it should have been in game. Like 1 week later, you should have been able to. All right, you did whatever patterns, people discovered whatever thing. Okay, it should just tell you every single one, so you don't have to go to some third party thing to figure out the combos. Like, okay, the wonder's over, guys. What are your
yeah, I
thoughts on
definitely
that stuff?
found that. Like I had all of them, but Effigy found out by day 5 or so, and Effigy turned out to be the very worst of them all. And it's like the hardest of the fights and the least, very unimportant in terms of loot. But I had everything except it's discovered really quickly, and then there was no way I was going to discover Effigy by myself. One of the
Gotcha.
pieces in it, I would continually upgrade past it every time I got it, and as a result, I just would never find it. And so, yeah, I agree. I think they repeated a lot of mistakes from Bestiary 3.1.0,
Hmm.
where there was a lot of competing demand for specific resources. So in Bestiary, for those that didn't play 3.1.0, a lot of the recipes for crafting required the sacrifice of 4 specific rare beasts. And some of these recipes were miles better than others, and they would require the same beast as each other. So you could have a situation where by using I'm not sure that it was this, but let's say using Create a Random Rare Amulet would use the limiting reagent for Split Beast or something like that. And so you'd have this thing where you'd be wasting something genuinely precious. And that turned out to be the case with Frenzied being one of the rarest Arch Nemesis tier 1 things. And so you would find that it was very hard to complete recipes that required Frenzied unless they were the simplest recipe with Frenzied.
Hmm.
Because you would always have, I think Frenzied and Gargantuan might have been a recipe. I could be wrong on that, but because you would never not have Gargantuans and they had a fairly good reward, so you'd be picking them up, you would find this situation that you always had Frenzied and Gargantuan to use together. And that meant that you would not keep Frenzied in your inventory, and therefore you wouldn't find the other recipes you were missing.
Yeah. Yeah, that, but I mean, also like I don't like having to use all these third party outsource things too. And I know a lot of people are like, well, we've done that since all the time, or look at WoW. But I don't like that argument because like WoW had internal add-ons. Yeah, you were
Mm.
downloading it, but it actually it wasn't a separate program. And a lot of people aren't programmers, so I mean, there'll probably be some day where someone goes through, makes a legitimate looking thing, and then puts some sort of malware on everyone in the entire community. That's a huge vulnerability.
It is. I've seen that. I've known of that happening. When I was doing some research on a video on some of the things that cheat sites do, I talking about the people that facilitate cheating through selling exalted orbs and things like that. And I was putting out a video on why players shouldn't do that. And one of the things I'd found was from research into old school runes, not old school RuneScape, actually RuneScape back in the day. So before there was old school RuneScape, one of the popular fan sites got compromised like that, and like a whole lot of players wound up with keyloggers on their accounts. And then at some point down the track, there was a whole lot of items stolen from accounts that were linked to that fan site. On another occasion, people would create logins on a fan site, and they would then use their login and password, and their login would be their email address, or
Yeah.
maybe they just told to give their email address. Now, those email addresses, the other party, like the dodgy fan site, would then try and log into the email address using that same password. And some people's email addresses were compromised that way, which is an even worse situation than having your game account compromised. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things where pushing people to external resources ends up being a varying level of potential malware threat, but it's definitely real. I agree with that. That's definitely a problem.
And that's usually not discussed when people bring it up. They're like, oh, well, it's okay to do that. Well, I don't know that it's okay. It just takes
Yeah,
one popular tool, especially because they're open source, and then someone doesn't have the time. And there's all the pressure at the league rush. It takes one time, one popular tool gets compromised by one open source dev person that someone hid something, and whole community is compromised.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or at
So
least the ones that don't have the programming knowledge to have or at least the general Windows OPSEC knowledge to pick it up at the you might be able to protect yourself individually, but there'll be plenty of people will get compromised. Like if Path of Building got compromised, for instance.
yeah, that would
That's
be absolutely devastating because almost everyone's using that for sure. Yep.
Yeah. And even if there's a it's not some serious exploit, but it just tries to get you to enter your password somewhere, like that's going to get a percentage of the player base. It's not necessarily going to get everyone, but it doesn't need to get everyone to be devastating.